One of the very fundamental things that you will find in almost any programming language is the ability to change the flow of the actual program that you're writing, whether that's through if statements which make things conditional, or whether that's through repeating statements using things like while loops or do loops. And those features are also available within MySQL, and using them can help you make your queries even more complex without impacting your overall system. One of the more common things that you will see people do who are not particularly experienced with MySQL is they will execute one query, which they will pass back to their PHP script or whatever else. They will perform some processing on it, and then depending on the output, they will actually execute another query within MySQL. But this can be done all at once within MySQL if you know how to. So the first thing we're going to look at is the if statement. And what we're going to do is we're going to select all of the data from the staff table. Now in this example, we don't actually want to output every single column. We want to just output specific ones. So let's change this to staff number. And maybe also staff job title. And also the salary. Imagine for some reason though that we decided whenever we output salaries, we want to inflate the manager's salaries by 10%, but we want all of the other salaries to remain exactly as they were. It's not necessarily a realistic target, but it is something that we can do to demonstrate the functionality. So what we can do is we can type if, and then in brackets we're going to type the actual condition. So we're going to look for staff job title, and we're going to look for managers. After a comma, we're going to select what happens if the job title is manager, so if this condition is true. So we're going to return salary times 10%. If this condition is not true, we're going to have to also specify what we want to do. So we would there have just the salary. And then we're going to change this to output as salary so that we actually get a column called salary. So if we look at this now, we've got this manager here whose salary is $28.50. But if we run this query, his salary will change to $31.35, while all of the other values will stay the same. And so we can use this to perform actual calculations on our queries, so that when we do output the query, we only have to output it once. Because it does turn out that manipulating the query before outputting it is more efficient than outputting it and then manipulating it later on. Now this is only a very simple query, but the important point is that we have the if word, and then in brackets we have three components. We have the condition, what happens if the condition is true, followed by what happens if the condition is false. And because if we wanted to put more if statements within this if statement, and actually nest them as far as we wanted to, until we were able to cover every specific scenario that we were trying to. If we comment this out, the next type of control function that we have available to us is the case statement. So we're going to do something very similar. We're going to select everything from the staff table. Then we're going to narrow it down, and we're going to have specific queries, specific fields rather. And we're going to have case. This works very similarly to the if statement, but with the case statement we obviously use it slightly differently in that we have a scenario and then we look for each different answer to see whether an answer actually exists or not. So it's like an else if statement where we have multiple layers where the data is actually compared. but instead of having brackets with the actual conditions in, we just specify the thing that we're comparing, which would be the staff job title. And I'm going to separate this out onto multiple lines. We have when, and we actually outline a specific criteria here. And unlike a select statement, we have the word then, and then we have the actual condition that we want to execute under that scenario. When the manager is selected, we want to actually multiply the salary by 1.1. Just going to separate this down. But like an actual else if statement or a case statement, you are able to actually access the default statement, which is just with the else command. And then you're just going to want to return the salary. And then finally we end this with the word end. So this whole command here, the whole when command, is all one thing. And if we run this, we're going to get something very similar to the if statement which we executed earlier. And obviously the salary here has increased for the manager, but not for anyone else. As with most programming languages, there are trade-offs when you're using an actual case statement as opposed to an else if statement. And you will need to actually measure the benefits of those trade-offs when you're actually designing your queries, because they will impact in performance. So if we comment this out, we're also able to perform repetitive tasks within MySQL by way of while loops. We also have things like the repeat loop, which is almost the same as a do loop. So a while loop will look at the condition to see whether it's met first, and then if it isn't met, it will perform the code within that while loop. With a repeat loop, it does the exact opposite. It will perform the code, and at the end of that performance execution, it will actually check whether the condition is met. And this means that the code within the loop is always executed at least once. We're going to look at these more when we talk about the procedures later on, because we're not really able to demonstrate them in action right now without knowing what a procedure is. But the important thing to know just now is the fact that we are able to perform repetition and repetitive tasks, and we will look into it in much more detail later on.